So now we're actually going to get to the meat of things, which is production, because during production is when you have a lot of stuff that you have to make sure gets written down. So in this phase, we are continuing to collect the information needed for our audit trail and in-out balance. Plus, we are showing that the products themselves are ones that have been approved and are in compliance with organic standards. Lastly, we are also showing that our methods, such as cleaning and sanitizing, are in line with organic standards and use materials that have been approved by our certifier. So here's a detailed list of what information you need to capture. I won't go through each one specifically, but this is a good slide to maybe take a screenshot of. And where I have an asterisk means those are for operations that have both non-organic and organic. Okay, actually I have two different things. So the date I have and the time of cleaning. So time is really important if you have non-organic and organic production because you're showing that you cleaned possibly between two different times. And then if you use products that are approved but with restrictions, you might have to show, so you might have to have some other sort of record, say maybe like a parts per million record that you're actually meeting those restrictions. So then our goals of how to set up the system to collect all this information, our main goal is to create forms that are a bit fail-safe. I always err on the side of clarity. This is where the fundamental underlying motto I use to develop systems come in. It's a simple one. It's give people the benefit of the doubt and set them up for success. This means that I assume that people want to fill out what is required of them, but that they forget, they get busy, they're concentrating on all the tiny details that make a product great. My job then is to help them do the right thing, to help them comply by using forms that are quick and therefore do not get in their way. Forms that both collect the needed information and remind them what they need to be doing. I feel like this is the most important part of how I think about creating records. And it really comes from the fact that I started in production and then ran production and realized, you know, it can get so frustrating. Why aren't people writing this down? Until you're the one doing it and you realize, oh, like I'm a human and I forget things and I get busy. And so really these forms can help everybody do better. So lot codes, you also have to be setting up lot codes in this section of your record keeping. And I like to set them up to easily pull the corresponding batch records. So whatever your lot code system is, it should help you easily find the batch record being referenced by that lot code. And the reason that I say that is because usually why are you going to pull a batch record? It's because a customer complains about a product, if you have a recall, or during your inspection. And in all three of those cases, what you're going to have is a lot code, and what you're going to want to pull is the batch record. You're also working to ensure that the cleaning, sanitizing, and purging that is required to happen does actually happen. And you're working to make it extra special, 100% clear when production staff should pull organic ingredients and when they are running organic production. This is especially true if you have mixed operation that has non-organic and organic. So this is a form I made for a small producer, and they were actually not organic, so there's a few changes that I would make to this form. So this was a form, they had one for each of their products that was already, a lot of the information was populated. So you see it has the name, I would add the word organic, so it would be organic wild blackberry jam for an organic producer. It had all the ingredients, again I would add the word organic, it would say organic blackberries, organic calcium water, no it wouldn't say organic calcium water, organic lemon juice, organic granulated sugar. It already had all the quantities down, and so they just needed to print this out each time they're going to run. They always ran the same size batch. Then the person working is going to fill out the rest of the information, and it's really important always to have some way that the person is verifying that what they used was organic. This is here, this column here for this form, and why I always do that is because it reminds people in the kitchen to always be thinking about whether they're pulling the correct ingredient, whether they're pulling the organic ingredient. This form also is collecting a lot of information for CGMPs, and then because, again, they were so small, it actually was able to have all their QC in just one form. However, a lot of operations don't operate like that. That was an operation that there's one person making, you know, like it was actually very, very small. They make like 200 jars of 3 flavors of product a year. This is for a much larger operation, and it's a milling operation. So in that case, when you have different phases, even if it's something like, you know, a sauce, like the example before, but if you have phases of production that are distinct from each other, I like to create separate forms for each phase. And that's more paper, but in the end, I find that they get filled out. Having one form that you have to remember to bring with you the next day or pull like a week later when you go back to that batch, it just never seems to work out. So in this example, the weigh ticket ends up being the receiving log and shows, in this case, the date, where it was coming from and how many pounds were coming in. And then there's a milling record, which ties to the weigh ticket by the date, and then shows how many pounds that entire day were processed. And you'd have, you know, multiple weigh tickets possibly that equal to this amount of pounds. There's other information here that you could have all sorts of information listed that has to do with the quality of the product. And then it would show how many gallons of oil you ended up with and what tank it went to. And then when you go to bottle things, you would pull from a tank. So you'd pull, in this case, from tank 1. You'd make the date of when you're bottling, how many you're bottling, what size of bottle, and who it was. I always like to have, in all of these forms, there's always a place for someone to initial so you can go back and ask questions. It's really, really important. But in this case, if you went through and totaled up all the bottlings from tank 1, you should be able to show that it equals or is a little bit less than all of the milling that went into tank 1 if you pulled all the mill records. If you have a racking in between, I also have forms that will help you track that. But in the end here, again, I go for simplicity. So I'm not asking the worker to tell me the total gallons and have them sit there and figure it out. I just have, like, think about what they're doing, and it's easy for them to say, oh, here's 100, and what size was it? So even if they're, you know, have 375 milliliters and not gallons, in the end, you can convert it, and you could create a digital record that would auto do that for you as well. So then we go on to cleaning, sanitizing, or purging. For some reason, this seems to be the record that people are by far the most resistant to keeping. I'm a big fan of having this form attached to either the equipment itself that needs to be cleaned or attached to the batch form. A lot of people like to have a separate cleaning log, and I just find that people don't fill it out as often because they have to actually go pull a separate log and fill out the information. If that works for you, that's great, but if it's not working for you, maybe try one of these other suggestions. It is more paper, but I also actually really like to have a one-page form that's filled out each time the cleaning or purging happens. That way I can actually organize it within my batch records, and if there's non-organic and organic production, I now have like a storyline for an inspector that I can just flip the page and I show, see, here was the non-organic production, flip the page, there's the cleaning, flip the page, and there's the organic processing, instead of having to jump back and forth between different forms. And again, that's for the continuity that I just find. I find it makes this all just seem more simple, and I'm just trying to make this seem more simple and more streamlined and just easier to wrap my head around. If you use an enterprise system like Fishbowl, I really recommend adding an item to your inventory that details the organic cleaning needed before an organic run. You just add this item to all your bill of materials for organic products, and so then when the employee gets the bill of materials, there's actually a space they have to initial that says that they did the organic cleaning. And if you have a separate log they have to fill out, it would say, you know, did the organic cleaning, they have to initial it, and then it says filled out cleaning log, and they have to initial it, and that's actually then part of their bill of materials for that batch. Or sorry, that ends up being part of their work order because you put it on the bill of materials. That's all Fishbowl speak, but that's how it works. So now we're through production, and we're on to the sale, our final phase. So what do we need here? On your receipt or invoice, you need to list the product as organic and identify your certifier. You need to track how much product was sold so that you can finish your in-out balance and what lot code of product was sold for your audit trail. How your sales records are set up depends on how you sell your product. If you mainly ship product and use something like QuickBooks, you can create different items for the different lots of products. This will make any possible recalls very simple to track. So you could, depending on your size of your operation, you could in QuickBooks have, you know, organic Tulsi lot code and the lot code, and then a different item for organic Tulsi and the new lot code. So each time you're shipping, you're actually pulling the item, the specific lot code of item. You could also, if you don't want to have that many items in QuickBooks, which makes sense, you could also just, you know, write the lot code on the invoice before you send it out. So that could just be handwritten. When the person pulls the material, they handwrite it on the invoice. You keep a copy so that you can show it, you can use it for your tracking system, and your customer gets a copy. If, however, you're mainly doing farmer's stand or a farmer's market booth for sales, you could create a log when you pull product and return it to inventory. That way you don't have to record the lot code upon each sale, but have captured it when you brought product out to be sold each day or market. Then this last one is, again, for when you're mainly shipping product, but say you're mainly shipping product and the person generating the invoice is different from the shipper. Could be even in a totally different facility. Well, then you can just have a shipping log that shows the date, who you shipped it to, what the product was, and the lot code. In this case, because you're also going to have an invoice, you don't have to have the quantity shipped, because in this case for your audit, you would show the invoice, and then you'd also show, this would just be the record of what lot code went out. If you're using something like FreshBooks, or sorry, like not FreshBooks, if you're using an enterprise system, it's really handy for this phase of record keeping because the batch codes or the lot codes are just scanned before you ship the product, and that's saved within the system. So enterprise systems definitely make this part a little bit easier. So now you can see how this all pulls together. So your sales document contains these things. It contains your lot code and shows that the product was sold after it was in fact produced. This ties to the exact jar of a product. The lot code then ties to a batch record, which again shows that production happened before shipping and after receiving the ingredients. It also shows that you produced as many units as you sold and used ingredient quantities that you did in fact purchase, because on this batch record are all the ingredients you used and their lot codes. By looking at the individual ingredient lot codes on the batch record, you can then pull your receiving documentation, and this will let you prove that you purchased that quantity of ingredients before you produced the product and that the ingredients were in fact organic. This is another great slide to take a screenshot of, and when I'm going through and checking records, I often will reference this just to make sure. I'll use this as kind of my checklist of the sales document. Does it have these things on it? Okay, it's good. So this brings me to what I call the everything list. This is my recap. It's my list of everything you need to track written in language that explains why we are tracking it. I, again, highly suggest taking a screenshot of this slide. I'm also going to upload this to my website so that you guys can download it and have it for your records. After the webinar, I definitely recommend going through and circling anything that you do not already track in your record keeping system and star the things that you do track, so you kind of have a sense of what are the areas that you really need to focus on. So just to quickly go through them as a summary, your organic system plan will show that the site plan of your facility, the product flow of your facility, and that pest control is in accordance with regulations. We didn't go into those in depth because they're pretty self-explanatory. Then you're showing that ingredients listed as organic in ingredient deck were in fact organic. You're showing that you didn't use non-organic ingredients to supplement your organic ingredients. You're showing that you didn't sell more organic product than you actually made. How do you do this? You have that inventory of ingredients. You show the quantity of finished product from each lot or batch of product made, and you show sales of your final product. You're showing that the labels you used are compliant. You're showing that there are no residues of restricted materials in your products, and that the products you are using to clean and sanitize are compliant and have been approved by your certifier. You do this by showing what you cleaned with, that you properly rinsed, that you had chlorine monitoring records if needed, that you had quaternary ammonium residue testing if needed, and that your products are OMRI, WSDA, or CCOF listed. I put CCOF in there because if you are certified by CCOF, they have a database that you can check anything that they've approved before will be on there, and it makes it really easy to add it to your OSP. But other certifiers might have a similar situation. And lastly, you're showing that your product wasn't contaminated with non-organic material. You're showing this both by showing when you cleaned and that trucks are cleaned between non-organic and organic transport, that equipment was sanitized or purged between non-organic and organic production, and that grading and sampling tools were sanitized between use in non-organic and organic products. All of these types of things would use the same types of cleaning, sanitizing, purging records we talked about during production. So now I'll just give you a few general tips that when I set up my record keeping systems. One thing that I didn't list on here is just to use, if you're the one who's also filling out the records, I'd say play on your strengths. It sounds really funny and it's a little bit dorky, but I'll let you guys know I am kind of a dork. I had the hardest time keeping my bills organized. I just hated it. I hate getting bills, like I hate everything about it. And then I started keeping them in a binder, and a weird dorky thing about me is I love 3-hole punchers. I don't know why, they just make me really happy. So once I had to 3-hole punch the things to put them in a binder, all of a sudden I started organizing and keeping my bills that I needed to keep, which was great because sometimes you need those things, and if you don't have them and you accidentally threw them away, then you can't prove that you paid. So yeah, just think about like what types of records do you like to keep, even if it's statistics for a baseball team. Like, why do you like to keep them? How do you keep them? And try to make a system that kind of plays off those strengths. The other ones that I do have listed here is to really use color as much as possible. Color is a great way to alert people to the organic status of a batch record. You can print batch records in green when they're organic. You can use, when you're putting the lot code on products, use green stickers for organic instead of like yellow stickers for non-organic. Use green profile folders for your product files. Just like make everything, just keep people awake is what you have to do. Like just keep people thinking. Because hopefully your production ticks along and hums along and people can get in that flow, and you're really trying to break it and keep them thinking. Assume people will forget. So it's not that people don't want to do it. It's not that they're lazy. It's just that we get busy and we forget. And it's annoying. Like, it's annoying to have to fill out a form. So just assume the best and create these forms in ways that are going to make it really easy to fill them out. Include instructions on forms, so make it really clear what it is they have to fill out. Create forms that everything needs to get filled out. I really don't like forms that sometimes we use this part of the form and sometimes we don't. If that's the case, make a separate form that gets pulled for that type of production. But every form should be like, we know what we have to do here and it's everything. Using checkboxes is also better than having something that people need to fill out, having it really clear what the answers are. It's organic or non-organic, not like organic status and they have to write in organic or not organic. Just have 2 boxes, they check one. When you're creating your system, think about both how you want to access the information and when it's easiest to write it down. If you find the marriage between those 2 things, that's really your perfect system. And in the end, the main thing to tell everybody that works for you and to always keep in your mind is that it didn't happen unless you wrote it down. It's great if they do all the cleaning in the world. I don't distrust them. But in the end, it didn't happen unless you wrote it down. Keep a notebook or file on your computer that explains the system and just keep it up to date. As you create the system, just make little notes on your computer, like this is how you fill out this form. And as you go, you're creating your standard operating procedures, which we're all going to need to have in the future, not for organic, but for the government. And lastly, I like to say, feel free to use humor. There's no reason that all the forms in production and record keeping need to just be cold and wonky language. The language should be language that the people reading them understand. They don't need to know the law behind it. They just need to know what to do. And if you make it funny, they're more likely to do it. So just make it fun and funny. Bring personality into these forms so that they don't feel like this dull task that we have to do. So I'd love to hear from you all by writing in what one thing you would like to implement in the next week. I find it really helps. There's so much information here, so just thinking about what's that one thing that you learned today that you really want to say, in the next week I'm going to add this to a form, or I'm going to tweak a form in this way, and just have a clear goal of that one next step so that you actually accomplish it.
Great, thanks, Ellen. And yes, everybody, please send in what you're thinking of doing next week. That was a really great kind of overview of everything you need to keep records on. And thanks for sharing the story about the 3-hole punchers. That's awesome. That's I think that, finding ways to make record keeping fun is, yeah, awesome. We had someone write in and ask if you recommend any type of lot, stamp, or stickers. Like currently they're creating their own, but we're wondering if you had any recommendations.
Creating your own, like just getting, the stickers that you, print, write them and then print them off is great. You can also get, and I don't remember the company's name, if you write in your email, I can follow up, or email me and I'll follow up with you. But they have ones that they look like, the things at grocery stores that they will sit there. I guess they don't do it anymore because everything's scanned, but they would sit there and put the price on the bottom of everything on the grocery store. I really like those because they're not very expensive. So for a smaller operation, that's really easy. You just, put in the number and then you can just, it's like a gun kind of thing, and you just put it on the bottom of all of your jars. It depends on what your package is too, if you need it to be aesthetically pleasing or not. If your lot code is smaller, you can actually use those little, like they used to use at the library, they still make those, the little stamps that you move around the letters and the numbers so that you can just stamp things. That takes a little bit more effort though, because you're having to sit there and stamp everything. So it kind of depends on your size. But send me an email and I can send you the information for those guns. And once you're bigger, then they have part of your labeling line can be a little jet printer that just prints the lot code on the package itself. But if you're a little bit smaller, you'll want another way to go, so that's a little more affordable.
Great, thanks. And before we get on to our next question, I just wanted to remind everybody that we will be sending out a PDF of the presentation, so you'll have that as a reference along with the webinar recording.
Okay.
So if you,
Thanks.
yeah, so it'll be there and people can access it. So we had a couple people write in and kind of touch base on what they're going to implement in the next week, and someone wrote in and said, I want to implement all the processes, that if it's not written down, then I didn't get it done, and really appreciated that idea. And then another one is going to work on implementing market and shipping logs. So those are some good ideas on what to work on next. If anybody else wants to share that, feel free to write in. Another person was asking for your email and website address, which I think is later on in the presentation. So we will also make sure that everybody gets that information. And then we had another question come in that you mentioned a number of different software application or software that you can use for record keeping, including Fishbowl. Are there other ones that you've seen people use that are worth mentioning?
There's QuickBooks, and QuickBooks now has a plugin for production. I honestly don't have personal experience with it, and definitely for all of these are kind of investments, so I would suggest trying to outreach to other producers in your area and get feedback on people who've used it. But QuickBooks does have that now, and there's this new one that I just heard about, and I'm going to blank on the name. It's called, I can't remember right now, but it's a Fishbowl-like system that I think is slightly less expensive. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, it's like a very techie name, but like more aspirational. It's like, you know, Sparkle or something like that. It sounds like an app, but it's not. If someone remembers it, just type it in so we can tell this other caller. But Fishbowl I have firsthand experience with, and it's a good investment, so you definitely want to make sure it's right for you, but the amount of things it does is pretty staggering, and will grow with you to a very, you know, anything like that, you know, there's going to be things that you kind of have to change so that it works with the software, but in the end it can track so many different things. For the smaller folks, though, unfortunately, I don't know of anything that's really kind of more like if people use HoneyBooks or FreshBooks I use that kind of stuff for my consulting. It's kind of like a QuickBooks Lite for, you don't need everything that QuickBooks does. It's kind of like an app version of QuickBooks. There really isn't something like that for an enterprise system yet, which is really more what a small producer needs, but hopefully there will be. Great. So we just have a few more things to talk about. So a lot of times people ask me, you know, how often should they be checking their record keeping system? I recommend that when you first develop a system, having a second person, if you have a second person, having a second person who's not responsible for maintaining the system directly, check that records are accurate and completely filled out one time a week. So when I set up a system for someone, I do this. I come in, I pretend like I'm the inspector, look at everything, like what is the lot code on that batch record, make sure it's on the receiving log, just kind of do my own little audit every week. And then once the system is up and running, and then meet with the person who's filling it out and see what questions they have and why it's not getting filled out, and really work together to get it filled out correctly. Once the system's up and running, then this can happen just like one time a month to check in. This way you aren't scrambling right before your inspection time to organize and verify your records. I still, like, even when it's up and running, like having checks throughout the year. And then after your inspection, I always recommend taking an hour to think about what was really easy during your inspection. What did he ask for, she asked for, and you had it right away? What didn't work? What didn't you have written down? What did you have to scramble to find? And then think about how to tweak your record keeping to make it simpler next time. Using this test and tweak process, I say that usually within 3 years, you'll have a system that when your inspector comes, they're like, wow, that was really simple. And in the end, most certifiers, you're paying hourly for your inspector, so it's really going to save you money to be organized. I've found that anyone involved in organic production, from office staff to people on the floor, should be trained in the basics. When people know why they must do something, they're more willing to do it. So I really recommend doing a light, even if people aren't very hands-on with the records, at least doing some light training with them to create a sense of trust and responsibility, and then people will sometimes surprise you. You can also keep a tab of how many days since you've had fully completed records, or have a staff lunch for a week when all records were kept accurately. Create little incentives at the beginning to get people doing it, and people will be more excited to actually fill out the records. I actually have a basic training for staff on my website if you guys would like it. It's my, when I'm doing just kind of a general light training on organic, it's what I use, so feel free to go over and use that same PowerPoint. And that brings me to more resources. So there are lots of resources out there, but these are my favorites. So first, your certifying agency. You don't have to know the ins and outs of the regulations, and that's not something, if you're an entrepreneur or a small business owner especially, you don't have time to be a certification expert. That's why you have a certifying agency. So call them if you have a question. Think of them as a resource, and they can be one. Cooperative Extension also has an Ask an Expert. If you Google that, you'll find the information, and that's a way to call someone and ask them a question if you can't get in touch with your certifying agency. I highly recommend being part of the USDA Organic Insider e-newsletter. This will tell you when these different regulations are up for vote. All of this is decided by the National Organic Standards Board, the NOSB. You can go to those meetings. You can submit public comment when, you can submit products to be included on the national list. It's really a collaborative process if you want it to be, and being part of that newsletter will keep you up to date with what's important. And then I really like the CCOF Organic Handler Certification Support Package. It's a great beginner package. Even if you're not certified by CCOF, it's free. It's available for everyone. And it really has kind of the nuts and bolts and also some template forms. And they also make an excellent organic labeling guideline sheet that really clearly explains the labeling requirements of made for organic, organic, and 100% organic, which still sometimes confuses me. So I reference that sheet all the time. Another great template form is from the Vermont Organic Farmers. They have an ingredient and processing aid form I really like, because it kind of walks you through figuring out whether or not you're going to be able to use something in an organic product. And then I have lots of training materials. I'm always trying to keep free materials up on my website, because again, this is a big passion of mine. So if there's something you would like to see that you have had trouble sourcing, feel free to get in touch with me, and that could be the next thing I put up there. And again, this is me. So a few people, I thought I had my email on here. So we can send that out with the slides, but it's, we'll send it out with the slides, but it's ellenmary.me@gmail.com. So it's ELLENMARY.ME@gmail.com. You can also find me on my website, and I'm based in Petaluma, so there's a few folks on this call near me. Yeah, so thank you for letting me share what I've learned so far working on all this, and I'd love to hear any last questions.
So thanks, Ellen. That was a great wrap-up, and Yeah, I appreciated kind of you saying that, having all your employees sort of understand the behind the scenes process of why they're doing it and kind of giving them ownership of it is a good recommendation. And yes, we will definitely send out your email address with the resources we send out after that. So everybody will have a copy. And if there are any last questions, we have time for one or two more. You can send them in. One question we did have is, do you have any recommendations for kind of like, the day or two before your inspection, like what you can do so that, things go really fast and, you're not paying your inspector for sitting there waiting while you're rifling around in your files?
Yeah. So, depending on who your certifier is, they might send you a little, like, get ready for your inspection and kind of a checklist. And I would say start your own checklist. I have a very, detailed spreadsheet checklist that reminds me of each thing I need to do every year before the inspection. And it's basically kind of like going through my records and checking things, like making sure that, all the invoices are there, that I don't have to, hunt one or two down. And I just really lay it out, and then each year, instead of having to think about what I have to do, I just do the things I did last year. So if you don't have something like that yet, this next year when you get ready for your inspection, just actually write a list of everything you're doing. And then next year, and then after your inspection, be like, what didn't I have? Add that to the list. And then the next year, start with your expanded list. And if there's a few things the inspector asks that you don't have, add those to the list. And then by the end of it, you'll have a list of here's the say 15 things that I really want to check. I also, just for my own sanity, I actually run a few audit trails myself, and I copy it all, and I pull an audit trail. I pull a piece of product and I do the audit trail, so that I know, I'm kind of reminding myself almost how to walk the inspector through it. Because once if you're kind of confused, then they're confused, and then that leads to a lot of wasted time. So I just make sure I'm really clear on how my records work. I've pulled an audit trail so I can really show how it works. And then from there, I think they go much quicker.
Great. Thank you very much. And we had one more person write in with a software recommendation. They're using SoapMaker, which records all batches of ingredients. So that's another one people can look into. But I think we're going to wrap up. So Ellen, thank you so much for your presentation and sharing your insights on organic record keeping. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. And if anybody in the audience thinks of a question that they forgot to ask during the webinar, feel free to follow up with us. We'll send out Ellen's email, and we'll also have our email address later at the very end of the webinar. So I'm just going to go over. Ellen gave some great resources, and I just wanted to add a couple others. Again, the CCOF website has a lot of resources, including example handler forms. And if you're looking for information on our organic labeling, as Ellen said, it can be pretty confusing and complicated. CCOF has a great flyer as the National Organic Program, so those are places you can look for that. The CCOF Foundation also has a pretty large library of webinar recordings, so check those out. We do have a demystifying organic certification for processors that goes over the basics of organic certification. And then if you're also a grower and looking for more information on grower record keeping, we have a recorded webinar on that as well. We are in the process of putting together our fall 2017 education calendar, so check out our events page for upcoming trainings and events. And as we've talked about numerous times today, there's a lot of different organic certifiers out there. In the U.S., there's about 50 that are authorized to certify farms and businesses to the USDA organic regulations. So we encourage you to do your homework, find the one that works best for you. The USDA Agricultural Marketing Service is a great place to just look at all the options that you have out there. If you're interested in organic certification with CCOF, we're happy to talk with you. Jane Wade, our new applicant liaison, is wonderful and can answer all of your questions. Feel free to touch base with her. And thank you. We appreciated having you here with us today. We hope you found the presentation helpful. And please fill out your evaluation form. It'll pop up on the screen. It really helps us develop new programming and refine what we offer to the organic community. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to touch base with us, and have a wonderful afternoon.